WOTC finally gave me early access to the new Monster Manual, and I have thoughts. I mean, they still didn't pay me or anything, but I would have turned them down! For a long time, I thought the Player's Handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide were the most important of the core rulebook trilogy, but I couldn't have been more wrong. After going through this new release cycle, I'm starting to put together that the Monster Manual is more than just an assortment of rules and stat blocks. The Monster Manual should be the beating heart of this game. The creatures, lore, and imagery should be the inspirational muse for any adventure or campaign within the system. This much is proven true just by watching various live plays or sitting in at a home game or two. I often see DMs creating their own settings, pantheons, and histories, but I rarely see them deviate from the classic monster staples like liches, mind flayers, and dragons. Even as a player, the Monster Manual is likely to influence your experience at the table even more heavily than the rules for your own class and subclass. Every entry should spark ideas for plots and encounters. My own entire campaign world started with a what if about a certain monster. Let me know what you think it was in the comments below.
It's Pikachu!
It's the berry!
Fuck!
But does this new book live up to that high standard? Well, yes. And no. Like I said, I have thoughts. At the very least, the art is absolutely stunning. I know I probably sound like a broken record since I've been pretty thrilled about the art in the other core books as well. But this imagery is in a league of its own. Almost every single monster is represented with its own art that actually shows them in their respective layers and environments doing what they do, rather than just a random PNG showing you what they look like. Even now, I'm getting excited to edit this video because of how much art is present in this 384-page beast of a book. It almost deserves its own stat block, and that's saying something. Because even though they did increase the font size and the amount of art taking up space, there are over 500 stat blocks in this bad boy. That's a big jump from the roughly 350 creatures that were in the 2014 version, but I wouldn't exactly say that there are 150 new monsters here. The reason for this drastic increase mostly has to do with the inclusion of extra versions of popular monsters that are scaled up and down for different tiers of play. Don't get me wrong though, I'm absolutely stoked about the inclusion of these new options. Now adventures don't have to be so rigidly set in using only a small subsection of enemies with the right CR to match the level of the party. In the old rules, we had the CR 1/8 Bandit and the CR 2 Bandit Captain. So if you wanted a challenging, say, pirate encounter in tier 2 or 3, you had to cobble together something yourself or retrofit a different stat block on the fly. I can't tell you how much boring prep time I've slogged through having to design fresh NPC stats and abilities before a session. Now there's double the options that we had before. For example, the new book includes some extra bandits in the CR 7 Bandit Deceiver and the CR 11 Bandit Crime Lord. Although you're probably not reading this book for the bandits, this change is pretty consistent among a ton of other monsters as well. The Death Knight now has a weaker variant in the Death Knight Aspirant. There are like 4 different goblins, and you now have a whopping 7 cultist stat blocks instead of the 2 we had before. Look out! A cultist! Wait, aren't you the same guy we killed last week fighting that blue dragon? No. And being able to see how these monsters scale with CR also helps new DMs learn how to homebrew their own variant stat blocks. Which is good, because WOTC didn't include a lick of text about how to create your own monsters with their new CR system. We'll get to that later. What they did decide to print this time was a brief intro on how to actually run monsters in your games. Crazy, I know. While this was absent from the 2014 Monster Manual, I'm not exactly going to count that as a win in 2024. The section doesn't really discuss strategies or tactics found in other third-party books like The Monsters Know What They're Doing by Keith Amon, and I wouldn't really expect it to. The section is only 5 pages short, after all. What it does cover is how to actually read a stat block and how to utilize features like legendary actions and recharge abilities. Yeah, sorry, but you're not getting a cookie for including something that should have been there all along. The monster entries themselves do include a bit of guidance on how they'll act when players encounter them, but it's understandably thin. It's an unfortunate reality that these books can only be so big, and that's probably why it's lacking in the lore department as well. Personally, I don't mind this fact, since I usually make up my own histories, religions, and weird Discovery Channel animal facts.
This one has been living in there a very long time.
But I know this is a deal breaker for a lot of you, and I totally get it if that sways your opinion of the new books overall. Most creatures get a paragraph or two detailing their surface level vibes, along with a brief description that you can absorb at a glance. A green hag is described as a foul witch of the wicked wild. Hook horrors are echo-stalking underdark hunters, and Kuatoa are fish-like fanatics of the deep. I do like this. It seems like an intentional decision to make the game more nimble in the prep stage. I don't think they left paragraphs of info on the cutting room floor because they were too lazy to type it. But there is one new feature of this rulebook that I have been eagerly awaiting for some time. Beneath each creature's brief description is a line that conveys the possible habitat for each monster, as well as the treasure that adventurers may expect to find on them. With everything else that a DM has to plan, I feel like these kinds of loot tables often fall by the wayside, leaving adventurers to just collect a few D10 of gold as a panic option. So when I heard that we'd be getting specialized loot tables to eliminate that struggle, I was instantly sold. It seems like a no-brainer, really. I got my advanced PDF of the book right before I was planning to run a purple worm in our livestream game, so I was excited to see what kinds of treasure might lie in the belly of this gargantuan beast. None. The book says that purple worms have no treasure. Okay, it's just one monster. I mean, sure, purple worms are notorious for pooping out gems that they can't digest as they eat through swaths of raw earth, but let's have a look at some other entries. Lemur? None. Well, they're really low CR, so that makes sense, right? Lizard folk? Individual. What the fuck does that even mean? The monster doesn't have a treasure hoard, but it might keep monetary treasure. Chimera? Any. Well, that might as well say none. And the red dragon just says like and subscribe for some reason. Weird. Dow? Implements. Finally, an option that... Oh, wait, that just refers you to one of 4 huge magic item tables in the DMG. Again, not really helpful here. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They dropped the ball. Big time. This had the chance to be a feature that added a ton of value to this book, but instead, it's just taking up valuable space while we still have to figure out what loot these creatures possess. They could have solved this by making smaller loot tables in the DMG, or they could have just provided some number ranges for items within the existing lists. I would have even been happy with them just listing out a couple of items specific to each entry, knowing that we could always change it up ourselves or find something similar if we don't like what they picked. It was really pitched as something more curated in the promotional material, so to say that I'm disappointed would be a massive understatement. But that's enough about the fluff in this new Monster Manual. Let's have a look at what you really came here for. The monsters. More specifically, WOTC has worked on streamlining the new stat blocks so they're a bit easier to read at a glance. Veteran DMs will be able to navigate these changes without too much issue, but the first thing you'll notice has to do with the initiative being listed explicitly near the top of the stat block. It's a small change, but one that I like. It gives both the initiative modifier as well as a full value to use if you don't feel like rolling dice. Hilarious, I know. Next, you'll notice a pretty big change in ability scores. Monsters now all have their ability scores, modifiers, and saves listed in this more compact layout. As someone who often misses monster saving throw proficiencies by just looking at their modifier instead, I appreciate this change, even if it may take a little getting used to visually. Skills are still listed out with their corresponding modifiers, but then you may notice what used to say damage immunities and damage resistances now just read as immunities or resistances respectively. This is because both damage and condition immunities have been consolidated to reside under the same header, now just separated by a semicolon. I've missed those plenty of times before too, but I'm actually not a huge fan of this change. It seems like a really easy way to get confused about being immune to poison damage versus being immune to the poisoned condition, for example. But I guess we'll see how that pans out as we go. The next difference we find is actually in the traits section, and it's one that you might have missed. This section still lists out the passive abilities of monsters, but you'll notice that this ancient gold dragon now has 4 legendary resistances per day instead of 3, or it has 5 when it's in its lair. More and more, you'll find lair-driven boosts like this in certain stat blocks, because lair actions have either been done away with or absorbed into the corresponding monster stat block. The regional effects of lairs, however, do remain as options outside of the stat block, thankfully. So you'll still get all the flavor of extra effects within a creature's lair, while also trusting that everything you need to run the creature in combat is right there in the stat block. Next, you'll notice that the actions section has also been altered, combining the bite, claw, and tail attacks of this ancient gold dragon into one simple rend attack. I have mixed feelings on this, and I think most of you will too. Granted, many of the 2014 monsters had bite, claw, and other attacks that were similar enough to warrant this sort of consolidation, the ancient gold dragon included. However, I think it would have also been possible, and probably better, to give each of those attacks more individuality so that the monster felt even more robust and flavorful. Perhaps a bite attack might also grapple a creature, maybe claw attacks knock enemies prone, or a tail attack could hit creatures within a certain range as the dragon spins in place. These alternatives are similar to what you might find in third-party books like the ones from Kobold Press and MCDM, to name a few. As an experienced DM, I love this added complexity in my games, but I do think it can be overwhelming for beginners. So while I still think this may be an oversimplification, I can at least understand the reasoning behind it. And not all creatures have been given this same treatment, only the ones with attacks deemed too similar to keep separate. More than anything, I do feel like druids lose out the most here, even with a number of new options for wild shape that weren't in the 2014 Monster Manual. Some options do have expanded effects like I suggested before. The ever-popular brown bear can now knock enemies prone when it hits with its claw attack, but other beasts like the equally popular black bear have been reduced to a shell of their former selves. Just 2 rend attacks that deal an average of 5 damage and no more keen smell trait for advantage on perception checks. It's a mixed bag and probably enough for an entirely separate video. Maybe I'll review the new wild shapes when I make my druid guide in the future. At the very least, for creatures with rend attacks, some extra descriptive flavor will become necessary for DMs moving forward. The rest of the new stat block is relatively unchanged, but it is worth noting that legendary actions have indeed returned. There was some early speculation that legendary actions might be replaced with multiple reactions, but the designers seem to have walked that back. I'd wager this is due to the amount of old spells and abilities that keep creatures from taking reactions. Being backwards compatible can be a really tough design restriction. In any case, once again, this creature gets a boost in the form of an extra legendary action each round if it's in its lair. It's a simple change that I'm a fan of, and it would seem that the legendary actions themselves have been rebalanced so that there's no option that's clearly better than the others. Now, WOTC has also claimed that their CR system has been extensively reworked. Supposedly, it's no longer the train wreck we all experienced in base 5e. But I've noticed something as I've been looking through all these monster entries. Aside from the new creatures, there haven't been any presented with a new CR, at least none that I've noticed. So this means that either the creatures were rebalanced to match their existing CR, or WOTC is stretching the truth a bit here. I'll reserve my judgment for after I've had time to play with these creatures and balance encounters using the new CR rules from the DMG. Until then, let's just say I have a healthy amount of skepticism. But it's not all bad news. Possibly the best improvement coming from 2014 is the organization of the new book. The old manual had some pretty wonky arrangements in general, but now entries are organized in true alphabetical fashion. To find the Pit Fiend, you'll look under P instead of D for Devil, and to find the Gelatinous Cube, instead of O for Ooze, you'll go to G for Gangster. But what I like even more are the added encounter tables and appendices in the back of the book. These will allow you to search for creatures by their CR within corresponding habitats, or by creature type, or just by CR in general. As opposed to practically having to memorize the entire monster manual, this approach feels a lot more supportive of newcomers, and we've actually been making great use of it. Tomorrow night, we'll be running a very special live stream wherein my players will each take control of their favorite monsters and fight against an adventuring party that I put together as they defend their lair. So be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel before heading over and joining us for a sneak peek at some of these new creatures. And until next time, Go out there and make some chaos.